The Zenith is widely regarded as one of the most powerful and hardest to obtain weapons in Terraria. As the culmination of 18 swords scattered throughout progression, crafting the Zenith will test the player's skill, patience, and luck. This makes me wonder, is it possible to beat Terraria using only the Zenith ingredients? I begin my journey on a medium-sized Master Mode world. As with all new characters, I spawn with a copper short sword, the first in a long line of swords on our way to the Zenith. It has a very short range and incredibly small damage, so I'd like to replace it as soon as possible. There are a few candidates for this before killing any bosses. The enchanted sword can be found in shrines on the outer thirds of the world. However, travelling that far is difficult without mobility items, such as Hermes boots or a double jump. The Star Fury can be found in skyward chests on floating islands, but getting to these is difficult and time consuming without gravitation potions. The Blade of Grass is made from jungle spores and stingers found in the dangerous underground jungle, which I'm definitely not prepared for. The final option is the Lightsbane or Blood Butcher, depending on your world evil. This only requires Demonite or Crimtane bars, and is the safest option for an early game character. This will also give me access to many items I need from the underground in order to progress. While mining the start of my elevator, I mine enough gold ore to craft a pickaxe, as this is the easiest pickaxe to obtain that can mine Crimtane ore. I then set out to find the 30 pieces of ore required to craft the Blood Butcherer. This doesn't take too long due to the increased spawn rate in 1.4. While doing this, I make sure to collect all the gold ore I see so that I can craft gold armour. I get quite unlucky with chests, so I still don't have Hermes boots or Cloud in a bottle, but I do find enough ore to craft my second sword of the playthrough, the Blood Butcherer. While exploring the underground, I found a gravitation potion, which will make it a lot easier to find sky islands. The first sky chest I found contained fledgling wings, which will be used throughout all of Pre-Hardmode. I died shortly after to a harpy, so did some more exploring of both the surface and underground. After finding a few more gravitation potions and a cloud in a bottle, I took to the skies once more in search of a Star Fury. Luckily I found one in my first chest, and a second one soon after. The Star Fury is arguably the best sword in Pre-Hardmode, as it is one of the only two that shoots a projectile, allowing the player to keep their distance from the boss while still dealing damage. Continuing to explore the Sky Islands, I find a shiny red balloon, which further increases my mobility. One of my favourite things about the Star Fury is its ability to aid with exploration. When its star projectile hits a block, it releases a burst of light, which can be useful for finding caves, and eventually leads me to some Hermes boots. As I descend to expand my elevator, a message displays in chat notifying me of the coming arrival of the Eye of Cthulhu. With only a few minutes to prepare, I attempt to craft some potions and build a small arena. However, the Eye takes me by surprise, leaving me to fight mainly from the ground. With the Star Fury in hand, I managed to chip away at the boss's health while not taking too much damage. However, once the boss reaches its final phase, it becomes hard to hit with the falling star projectiles. After a long and slow fight, the Eye is eventually defeated, giving me the very useful Shield of Cthulhu. The next step of my plan is to delve into the underground jungle and obtain a few items. We need the Feral Claws, which will give an auto swing and a 12% boost to melee speed, the Sharpening Station, which will increase my armour penetration by a massive 12, and the materials to craft the Blade of Grass. I obtain the Feral Claws rather quickly, however I die soon after. While travelling back to the jungle, I use the Star Fury to scan for enchanted sword shrines. I find one right next to the jungle and dig down to receive the fourth sword on my quest. The enchanted sword is the only pre-hardmode sword to shoot out a projectile other than the Star Fury. While weaker in terms of damage, this projectile is easier to aim as it shoots from the player themselves rather than falling from the sky. With the progress I was making, I decided now would be a good time to expand my NPC housing, and started with the snow biome. I'm not much of a builder, so I took a lot of inspiration from other builds online. I'm happy with how the build turned out, but it took a long time, so I won't spend as long on houses for other biomes. Next, I move to the desert and flatten an area for my build. As I'm finishing it up, slime starts falling from the sky, and I take this opportunity for a free ping slime kill. This boss isn't much of an issue for me with my current gear, even in Master Mode. The only problem I notice is that my damage output is quite low when I keep my distance, which is worrying for hard mode as I won't be able to replace my projectile firing swords until after all 3 mechanical bosses. With King Slime defeated, I go to the jungle biome to make some basic housing for a pylon. I then descend into the underground jungle once again to get the items I missed from my last trip. With the pylon set up, it's a lot easier to travel back after dying, which speeds up this process significantly. I found a sharpening station, and while in a marble cave, I farmed for gladiator armour. This received a buff in 1.4.1, with a full set giving knockback immunity and offering the same defense as gold armour. After travelling back to my storage and crafting area, I assembled the Blade of Grass, marking the 5th sword of the playthrough. While useful early game, this sword is already outclassed by my Star Fury and Enchanted Sword, even when ignoring the latter two's projectiles. I construct a house at the ocean for the angler, then move to the dungeon and begin building an arena. Since Skeletron is free to spawn, I decided to test my damage output and it was far too low. It's clear that I need some major upgrades before taking him down, so I craft the summon for the Brain of Cthulhu and make an arena in the Crimson. You may be wondering why I don't just break 3 Crimson Hearts to spawn the boss. It's because I don't want to have to deal with the random goblin army spawns. It's also easier to use the Star Fury on the surface, as the star projectiles break upon contact with blocks. I use the Star Fury to take down the creepers in the first phase, then switch to the Enchanted Sword in the second. This fight is a perfect example of why these two swords are so hard to compare, as each has its own strengths and weaknesses, making them complement each other quite well. Now that the Brain is defeated, I can craft a Deathbringer pickaxe and mine some Hellstone for an upgrade to my armour. While I lose the knockback immunity from the gladiator armour, I get a boost to both my defense and damage output by upgrading to Molten armour. I also craft the Fiery Greatsword, which deals more true melee damage than my current swords, but has no projectile, so doesn't see much use. With my new armour, I once again challenge Skeletron. Due to the speed of the boss, it's hard to hit with the low fire rate of both my projectiles. Getting close enough to deal true melee damage is very risky, as getting hit by the head can stunlock me, resulting in a quick death. Both of these factors lead to a long boss fight of 7 minutes. With dawn around the corner, I deal the killing blow to Skeletron, granting me access to the dungeon. I steal a water candle from the dungeon to speed up farming for goblin scouts. Using the tattered cloth they drop, I make a goblin battle standard. I only need to defeat the goblin army once to get access to the goblin tinkerer, so doing this is preferred to breaking a crimson heart and hoping that it spawns. I dispatch of the goblin army and go in search of the goblin tinkerer. With his tinkering table and rocket boots, I can make some much needed upgrades to my accessories. I also reforged some of my accessories for better modifiers, with damaging modifiers being preferred to defensive ones. I return to the dungeon in order to search for the Muramasa. After many deaths I find it, and head home in order to pick up the other ingredients for the Night's Edge. This has the highest base damage and DPS of any pre-hard mode sword, and is in fact more powerful than many hard mode swords. It has a DPS on par with the Orichalcum sword, and better than the lower tier ore swords and the Breaker Blade. With the Night's Edge obtained, there's only one sword left to collect in pre-hard mode, and it's dropped by the Queen Bee. While clearing a space for the fight, I accidentally spawn the Queen Bee and die due to my arena not being complete. After completing the arena, I challenge her to a rematch. Queen Bee has to be one of my favourite bosses in vanilla Terraria. It's predictable, yet challenging for its stage and progression. I take this opportunity to practice ramming with the Shield of Cthulhu, as it's something I've never done and I know it's often used against Duke Fishron. This is a strategy in which the player dashes into a fast boss and uses the iframes from the Shield of Cthulhu to avoid damage. It works out quite well and I quickly dispatch of the Queen Bee. It takes a couple of kills, but I eventually get the Beekeeper, the final ingredient of the Zenith that's obtainable in pre-hard mode. This sword releases bees and has a chance of confusing enemies upon being hit, making it useful for farming and events. Now that every boss is defeated and every sword is collected in pre-hard mode, I decide to do some final grinding before my battle with the Wall of Flesh. I wanted to see if I could get Terra Spark boots without fishing and knew that the bottleneck would be finding a lava charm. I searched almost all of the lava layer and couldn't find one, so in the end I had to resort to lava fishing, which was slow and tedious. If you're looking to get the Terra Spark boots yourself, I'd recommend skipping straight to fishing. Not only is it quicker, it'll also give you other materials that you can use or sell for extra gold. Once I craft my Terra Spark boots, I get to work making a hell bridge for fighting with the Wall of Flesh. I make sure to clear a high ceiling so that I can be further carried by the Star Fury, which has become my favourite weapon so far in this playthrough. The last thing I do before challenging the Wall of Flesh is build a surface glowing mushroom biome. Once the truffle spawns in hard mode, I'll be able to set up a pylon here, giving me easy access to the space layer and the wyverns that spawn in it. At this point, I've done everything I want to do before hard mode, so I spawn the Wall of Flesh and begin the final battle of Pre-Hardmode. Once again, the Star Fury is the best sword for this fight, allowing me to ignore the hungry and attack the wall itself. I'm going to let the whole fight play out, as I think it will be useful as a guide to anyone wanting to use melee against the Wall of Flesh. Even if you include all pre-hardmode weapons, the Star Fury is one of the best options for this fight. It even stands strong when compared to the other classes, which are usually more suited to this fight due to the range required. I'm quite glad I spent the extra time to extend the ceiling, as it makes dodging the Wall of Flesh's lasers a lot easier. I'd recommend you do the same if you're struggling with this fight. It's definitely something I'll do again for future playthroughs, as it not only makes the fight a lot easier, but it also makes it more enjoyable. Something to note is that while the Sharktooth necklace is usually a powerful upgrade to players' damage against the Wall of Flesh, it's not too useful for melee, as the class can use the sharpening station to bypass most of the boss's defense. However, I forgot to use the sharpening station, otherwise this fight would have been slightly quicker. With the lasers becoming harder and harder to dodge, I deplete the remaining health of the Wall of Flesh and release the spirits of light and dark upon my world. With them comes the promise of further adventure and an ever-increasing challenge. If you liked this video, then please give it a like and subscribe to the channel to ensure you don't miss the next episode, where I'll be taking on the mechanical bosses using pre-hardmode weapons.